I spent years living under control and fear until I found the strength to fight and break free. I don't know if anyone here will truly understand what I'm about to say, but I need to get this off my chest. I grew up feeling like a burden, that nothing I did was enough, and that to exist, I had to be invisible. For a long time, I thought this was normal, that every family had its secrets and its own ways of educating. But what I experienced wasn't education, it was suffocation. My every move was watched. Every word had to be measured. Every choice was nullified before I even considered making one. And the worst part was that, to others, we were the perfect family. An organized house, Sunday dinners, fake smiles and photos. But inside, I was always broken. I would wake up with a knot in my stomach, already waiting for the next attack, the next disapproving look. This constant fear shaped who I was, a girl who believed she would only find peace if she completely erased herself. My name is Marta. I'm 29 years old, but when I close my eyes and remember my adolescence, it feels like I'm still that 15-year-old girl who just wanted to shrink down so she wouldn't be a bother. My mother, Helena, always controlled everything. She told me how to dress, who to talk to, what to think. Any sign of individuality was treated as rebellion, as ingratitude. I tried to please, but nothing was ever enough. If I got a high grade, she'd ask why I wasn't the highest in the class. If I tidied my room, she'd say there was a corner that wasn't clean enough. I began to believe I was defective, that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be enough. My father, Rogerio, was there, but it was as if he wasn't there. He agreed with everything she said. Sometimes he'd lower his head, sometimes he'd just change the subject. I felt alone even in my own home. What hurt the most was the comparison. There was always a better cousin, a friend's daughter who was more educated, a prettier neighbor. My mother made a point of reminding me of this out loud, sometimes even in front of others. I smiled to hide it, but inside it gnawed at me. I didn't know how to argue. I didn't have the courage to face it. It was easier to swallow, to keep quiet, to pretend it didn't hurt, but it hurt so much. I remember nights when I would lock myself in my room and cry silently, hugging my pillow to keep quiet. I wondered if I would ever be free, or if my whole life would be like this, obeying, keeping quiet, and enduring. The change began unexpectedly. I was already about 20 when I met Andre. It was in college in a study group. He didn't seem like anything extraordinary at first glance, but there was something about him that caught my attention. He listened, really listened. When I spoke, he didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't try to correct. He just listened and asked questions that showed genuine interest. It was so new to me that I didn't even know how to react. I was used to being invisible, to never having a place to speak. And suddenly someone looked at me as if I had value, as if my words mattered. I remember the first time I told him a little about my mother. I was nervous, thinking he'd think I was exaggerating, dramatic. But he looked me in the eye and said, "Marta, you're not the problem. The problem isn't you." Those words echoed in my head for days. I'd never thought that way before. I'd always believed I was to blame for everything, that I didn't know how to be a good daughter, that I failed at everything. Hearing that was like a crack in the wall my mother had built inside me. For the first time, I thought maybe I wasn't so wrong after all. At first, everything was slow and almost imperceptible. Small conversations during college breaks, texts exchanged late into the night, fingers that trembled when I read a message from him. But over time, it became a haven. Andre didn't come with ready-made solutions. He came with presence. I remember one day when I came, home devastated. My mother had humiliated me in front of some neighbors because of an outfit I'd chosen. I went in wanting to disappear, and he called me. He stayed on the other end of the line while I cried, not trying to fix anything, just holding my pain in a calm voice. On the phone, I could breathe. I felt my body slowly relax, my hands stopping their trembling. It was in him that I realized there was someone willing to see me for who I was, not for what I was to my mother. And that gave me the courage to, little by little, question myself. It wasn't a dramatic overnight revolution. It was a sequence of small choices. Saying no when something bothered me, coming home late, declining invitations my mother made just to control me. Each of these little things seemed insignificant, but together they began to form a line of flight. I felt anxiety. Yes, my body complained, my stomach ached, my palms sweated. But with each no, I said, I gained a little piece of myself back. Of course not. Everything was perfect. My mother noticed I was changing and reacted strongly. She increased her demands, began invading my things, asking questions as if I were an object needing to be guarded. Once, she found a letter I'd written to myself, a ritual I performed to put my thoughts on paper, and read it aloud during dinner, laughing at my dramatic behavior in front of everyone. It made me shrink inside. For several months, I felt like the whole house was conspiring against any attempt at autonomy. My father seemed torn. Sometimes he tried to protect me, but more often he ended up following my mother's orders, and I felt that terrible abandonment again. There were nights when I considered giving up everything, dropping out of college, marrying someone just to get out of the house, taking a job that would take me away from my own will just to buy peace. Anger grew, and at the same time, so did guilt, a mixture that left me confused and overwhelmed. I made a lot of mistakes during this period. I trusted the wrong people, ignored clear signs of manipulation in other relationships, and sometimes went back on decisions that would have been good for me just to avoid confrontation. The turning point happened in an almost banal way, and perhaps that's why it felt so real. A major argument with my mother, which ended with her telling me I was destroying the family, and that if I continued, she'd kick me out. It was the first time I felt fear of something concrete, of having to rebuild my life from scratch. Not because I would lose material possessions, I had almost nothing of my own anyway, but because previous abuses had taught me I didn't know how to be alone, that being alone was synonymous with failure. That external threat activated a primal fear, but it also triggered a different one. Upon hearing the word kick out, I realized that perhaps that was exactly what I needed, a clean break to begin healing. It wasn't an easy decision, nor a heroic one. I cried for days, called friends, spoke to Andre in a panic, and little by little began to put together a practical plan. Saving, looking for a better job, talking to the college administration about scholarships, seeing a psychologist. I didn't trust any magic solution. It was just hard work, and, at the same time, a daily confrontation with the shame I carried for thinking about putting myself first. The rebuilding process was awkward and full of setbacks. I had to learn to cook properly, manage money that previously simply disappeared under my mother's demands, and deal with the guilt that came when I closed my bedroom door to cry without explanation. I sought therapy. At first, I felt ridiculous talking about the little things I thought should be kept hidden. But the therapist showed me that what seemed trivial was actually part of a pattern of psychological violence. I learned to name them: manipulation, gaslighting, control. Naming them gave me tools. I made practical choices. I started working part-time at a bookstore, saved money, maintained relationships with people who respected me. And I made a lot of mistakes. I paid high rent out of desperation, trusted colleagues who talked nicely but offered little support, entered into relationships that promised salvation and only brought more confusion. But with each mistake, I learned a lesson. I learned to read the signs, to set clear boundaries, to say no, and to accept that not everyone will like me for it. My body also learned to respond differently. Before, tension was accompanied by constant headaches and insomnia. Later, I was able to sleep a few nights without nightmares, although I woke up with a start sometimes. Looking back today, I see that the change didn't erase the scars, but it gave me a new reference point for life. I still have bad days, when my mother's voice returns like a ghost in my head, telling me I'm not enough. On those days, my chest tightens, my breath becomes shallow, and my stomach churns. These are physical reactions that remind me that the trauma left real scars. But I also have real strategies. I write, I talk to my therapist, I call friends, and when all else fails, I reread old letters I wrote in the darkest moments to remember how I've gotten through others. The greatest victory wasn't building a perfect life. It was discovering that I can choose my battles, that I can make mistakes and keep moving forward, and that my voice matters even when it trembles. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival. And I learned to take care of myself in ways my family never taught me. There are still reconciliations to be made, with myself especially, and perhaps one day with my father, if he's willing to look in the mirror. For now, I continue sewing my own life, with crooked stitches, visible patches, and little by little, some new embroidery that I chose myself. One thing I'll never forget is the first night in my own room, away from my parents' house. It was small, rented, the walls peeling, the thin mattress on the floor. I should have felt free, but the truth is, I cried all night. The silence frightened me. The doors were no longer slamming, my mother's voice piercing the air, but her echo still lingered within me. I remember curling up under a thin blanket, my heart racing, thinking, what if she's right? What if I can't handle it? This feeling of physical and emotional helplessness almost made me give up in the first month. I slept poorly, woke with a rapid heartbeat, and felt like someone would burst through the door at any moment to tell me I was wrong. It was a difficult time, when even getting up and cooking rice felt like a struggle. But even so, there was something inside me telling me I had to keep going, that I'd suffered too much to turn back. Andre was crucial during this time, but not as a heroic savior, but as a constant presence. He didn't support me, he didn't solve my problems, but he held my hand through the worst days. There were times when I'd call him crying, saying I didn't want to try anymore, and he'd simply come, sit on the floor with me, and remain silent. That, to me, was worth more than any motivational speech. With him, I learned that support isn't about controlling, suffocating, or bossing someone around. Support is about being there even when there's nothing you can do. This kind of care gave me the strength to look for work, even when anxiety made me break out in a cold sweat just thinking about interviews. I stuttered, trembled, sweaty palms, but I kept going. Every no I received was painful, but it also reminded me that I was trying. Little by little, I got a steady job, and with it came small victories, paying my rent without help, buying a new pan, stocking the fridge with what I wanted to eat. It may seem like little to many people, but for me, it was concrete proof that I could live on my own. Contact with my mother during this period became increasingly difficult. I tried to maintain some kind of connection, perhaps out of fear of cutting her off completely, perhaps out of the lingering guilt that haunted me. But every call was a trap. She used her sweet tone to pull me back, but as soon as I disagreed with something, criticism and accusations would follow. You've changed, you're ungrateful, you don't care about your family anymore. It was as if she wanted to convince me that I only existed within the framework she herself created. After each conversation, I felt bad, chest pain, cold hands, a throbbing head. Therapy was essential for me to understand that I wasn't obligated to submit to this cycle. The therapist taught me to set clear boundaries, choosing when to answer, how long to talk, and even when to not answer at all. At first, I felt cruel for doing this, but gradually I realized that taking care of myself was the only way to break that pattern. Still, each decision to distance myself hurt, as if I were betraying my own family. This confusion was perhaps one of the most difficult parts of the reconstruction. A strong memory was the first time I returned to my parents' house after months away. I walked through the gate with my heart racing, like a teenager again, expecting a scolding at any second. My mother looked me up and down and said, "You've gained weight." It was the first thing she said. It pierced me like a knife, but it also served as a test. I took a deep breath, feeling my anger rise, but instead of fighting back or shutting up, I said, "Yes, and it's okay." My voice trembled. My legs felt like jelly, but I didn't back down. It was a small moment, but for me, it was a milestone. I left feeling that, for the first time, I hadn't let myself be crushed. This internal victory gave me the confidence to keep trying to set boundaries, even knowing that each confrontation would wear me down. It wasn't easy, because afterward she called me crying, saying I was cold and that I was hurting her own mother. These emotional manipulations were hard to face, but each time I resisted, I became a little stronger. The changes also affected my body. Before, I lived with constant stomach pains, migraines, and insomnia. When I started distancing myself and taking care of myself, these symptoms didn't disappear immediately, but they did lessen. I started getting full nights of sleep, even though I still woke up startled some of the time. My body began to respond better to my choices. A walk brought me relief, cooking for myself became an act of self-love. Even tidying my room the way I wanted gave me a sense of control over my own life. They were details, but each detail represented something enormous. I was no longer the invisible girl who sacrificed herself to survive. I was learning to be a woman, an adult, my own person. Still insecure, still full of fears, but my own person. One of the biggest shocks for me was realizing how the past still controlled me even when I was far from my mother's house. I no longer lived there. I already had my own life, but all it took was hearing a tone of voice similar to hers for my body to stiffen. Once, at work, my boss called me out on a simple mistake, and I started shaking, breaking out in a cold sweat, as if I were 14 again, about to get an endless scolding. It was at that moment that I understood what the therapist always said, that physically leaving an environment doesn't mean emotionally leaving. The abuse continues to resonate within us, shaping our reactions. This frustrated me greatly because I wanted to be free once and for all. But little by little, I learned that freedom doesn't magically come. It is built, repeated, reaffirmed. And that falling back into old patterns doesn't mean failure. It means the process takes longer than we'd like. Another internal battle was dealing with anger. I grew up suppressing myself so much that when I finally started to speak up, my anger exploded. I found myself yelling over small things, crying with rage, breaking objects. Then came the guilt. Look, you're just like your mother. This fear of repeating the cycle tormented me. The difference I learned later is that feeling anger didn't make me like her. It was how I handled it. So instead of stifling or exploding, I started writing. I had a notebook where I poured out curse words, accusations, everything I'd never had the courage to say out loud. It wasn't pretty, but it was liberating. I also started running, even without conditioning. Each step was a way to release the weight I carried. I didn't cure my anger all at once, but I learned to release it without destroying myself or hurting others. Over time, I began to create new family connections. I grew closer to friends who treated me with respect, and I was welcomed into homes where I didn't have to apologize for existing. I remember a dinner at a friend's house, where we laughed loudly, knocked over glasses, and no one fought. I was moved that day, because I realized this was normal for many people, but for me, it was a learning experience. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's also where we find security and love. This discovery gave me the strength to move even further away from my mother's manipulations. Realizing there were other ways to relate was like opening a window in a dark room. I no longer needed to settle for the crumbs of controlled affection I'd received my entire life. I won't lie, I still miss having a real mother. Sometimes when I see friends receiving affection, listening to advice, or simply sharing moments with their mothers, a pain wells up inside me. It's a void that can't be filled. I needed to accept that I'll never have that relationship the way I wanted. This grief has stayed with me for a long time, and it still appears on specific days, like birthdays or important dates. But today I can look at it without destroying myself. I've understood that acknowledging my absence doesn't make me weak. It makes me human, and that I can be my own source of care. I can be the mother I never had, even if it means learning in practice what I was never taught. This process of self-acceptance is still new, but each time I can embrace myself without judging myself, I feel like I'm taking an important step. My father is a complicated figure in this story. Part of me still feels angry that he was so neglectful. I wish I had a father who would have defended me, who would protect me, who would show me I wasn't alone. But he chose to remain silent. Little by little, I'm trying to understand that perhaps he too was trapped in his own fears, that his silence was another form of submission. This doesn't justify it, but it helps explain it. Recently, we had a difficult conversation. I told him, with a trembling voice, that it hurt me deeply to grow up without protection. He cried, apologized, but didn't know how to say much more. I don't know if we'll ever be able to rebuild anything, but I've realized that carrying hatred only keeps me trapped in the past. It's not complete forgiveness, it's not magical reconciliation, but it's the beginning of peace within me. And that, for now, is enough. Over the past few years, I've learned to build routines that make me feel safe and alive. I started cooking for pleasure, choosing my clothes without fear of criticism, going out alone and enjoying my time. Small actions, but they represent real freedom. When I look in the mirror, I still see emotional scars, marks of a lifetime of trying to mold myself to fit someone else's standards. But I also see strength. I see someone who survived an environment of control and manipulation, who learned to take care of herself, to say no, to respect her own limits. Each daily decision to choose my well-being is a victory. There are still days when anxiety hits hard, when memories of my mother invade my mind, and my body reacts as if under attack. But now I know I don't need to run from these feelings. I can observe them, feel them, and let them pass without them overpowering me. My relationship with Andre remains a pillar of support, but it's not the center of my existence. He taught me that support isn't dependence, that love isn't control, isn't domination. It's presence, care, partnership. And that's exactly what I seek in all my relationships now. I've learned to recognize people who truly respect me, who listen without judgment, who allow me to grow and make mistakes without fear. I've learned to reject toxic relationships without feeling guilty. Each time I do this, I feel my body relax, my mind clear, my heart breathe. Emotional freedom, which seemed impossible as a teenager, has become a path I walk every day. I also had to learn to deal with the guilt I carry. For a long time, I thought that denying myself would be the solution to peace, and that distancing myself from my mother was selfish. Today, I understand that prioritizing my life isn't selfish. It's survival. I still feel pain when I think that my mother will never be the person I wanted her to be. But I've learned that I can accept this without it destroying me. I can choose my happiness, even if it doesn't align with the expectations of those who raised me. This daily decision, though simple in theory, is an act of constant courage. Each choice for myself is a way of honoring my own life, of validating my existence and my right to be free. I know I'm still in process. There are days when memories of the past paralyze me, when I find myself comparing my life to others and questioning my choices. But there are also days when I wake up with a smile, sip coffee while looking out the window at the street, feel in control of my life and grateful for the path I've traveled. Every step I've taken has taught me that I'm capable, that I can rebuild my story even after years of manipulation and psychological abuse. I've learned to appreciate small victories, to recognize my strength, to not blame myself for feeling pain, and to keep moving forward, even when the path seems difficult. Today, I am the Marta I always wanted to be, even with all the scars. I'm a woman, an adult, in control of my life, and I'm still learning to deal with the ghosts of the past. But I know that every step, every decision to put myself first, has brought me here. I've managed to break toxic family patterns, learn to love myself, take care of myself, and build my own freedom. And above all, I want whoever reads this to know that it's possible. It's possible to escape a suffocating environment, a manipulative relationship, years of invisibility. It's possible to rebuild your life, even if some of the pain still lingers. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's real, and it's achievable. There is a path, and it starts with believing you deserve to be happy.